In my previous video I explained how my sort of combined grow towers and soil feeding stations worked, but this video I just want to show the grow bucket part on top. So once again it's a 25 litre HDPE container, and I've got various holes drilled in. That's for drainage, and it also, once it's sitting on that capillary reservoir, then that will wick up into the soil on here. And then this one's slightly different because I've used the top of the container, and I've cut this one down so it's quite shallow. It's only about 120 millimeters deep. So what I'm going to do is kind of tend to use this one as like a sort of just for starting off plants, and also just as a lid for my soil feeding stations in the ground. I thought that'd be quite effective because I could grow things like sedum or crimson clover or something like that, like a green manure, and then literally whoop, plop that straight out and compost it and grow something else. Or just once you're growing tomato plants and things like that, that can fit underneath a cloche with the wicking reservoir there, and then you can use these holes here just to poke it out and do what you want. Divide those plants up, pot them on, plant them out, or whatever. So it's a little bit more flexible, and it's just shallower, so this will fit underneath one of these sort of smaller cloches, and it's quite a nice little grow space. And then obviously with the soil feeding station you're going to get loads of worm activity in that soil as well, so that will aerate and improve that soil, and it'll build up a bit more sort of soil life for when these plants are planted out. So that one's like the little seed tray, and it's quite a nice size, quite like that. And then this one is a deeper bucket, so this is around about 250 millimeters deep, and that will fit on the sort of capillary reservoir as well. And what I've done here is this is just a recent addition. I've drilled the same size holes as in the soil feeding stations, because once that's full of soil and once it's quite wet, that's going to be hard to pick up because it's sort of, the sides are quite curved. And so what you can do is just poke your finger there, there'll be soil in there, and you just lift it straight out and then move it around where you want. And also on this one I've drilled additional holes in the sides, and what I thought is when the reservoir is sort of set into soil, and that will sort of sit on top, and this will be partly buried as well, it just gives another little space for worms to move in and out of these containers and just help to aerate the compost that's in there. So yeah, I've got sort of one grow bucket which is 250 deep, and then runs maybe 120 like that, so it's probably half the depth, but it's quite a nice shape as well. And I think once these are set in the ground, what I'm trying to do is the natural kind of white HDPE that isn't UV stabilized, so I'm trying to get that all buried under the ground, so that would be for in path or under path wormeries and things like that. And then where this is exposed to ultraviolet, I'm using the HDPE with a carbon black in it, which is much more durable. So yeah, I mean, it's the same stuff they make flower pots out of, and they'll last for years if you look after them. And it's quite, as you can see, it's quite a thick wall. It's around about 2 millimeters in places, so it's really sturdy. And with this one here, because you've got the opening in there, I think I'll get an old towel or something like that, put it through so it's like a wick, and then run that underneath, and then that just gives it a nice bit of contact with that capillary mat underneath. Yeah, so this is going to be nice. I'm kind of tempted just to have this as a lid, really, so then you can lift that off. It isn't quite so heavy. Feed the soil feeding station, plonk it back on top. Then you can, it makes it obvious which ones are soil feeding stations as well, because there can be some other kind of crop on here, or a green manure or something like that, and that'd be quite nice because you could harvest it and then put it straight into this worm bed, and then the worms will just work that material into the surrounding soil. But what I have noticed when I was using green roof planters, which are similar sort of depth to this but larger, where they were just sitting on top of the Daleks, and I had a plywood lid with a vent cut in the top, the soil in there was really, really nice, and those plants survived all through winter, no additional watering, and they're really, really healthy and really lush and kind of verdant. And the other ones where they had the same conditions without that worm activity, there's just so much compaction in that soil. So these as lids on top of those soil feeding stations, they're going to get moisture from the kind of wet kitchen scraps underneath as well, and then you've got that sort of double duty as well, because the worms will be aerating the compost in this container as well. I think it's going to look really neat as well, because the mulch will be just up around that, and that will be sort of set in, and it fits perfectly as a lid on here as well. So that's my thinking behind that. So that's the sort of starter one for the younger plants, and then I've got this one as really things like squash, where you kind of it's not warm enough to move them out into plant them out, so it just gives you a little bit more depth, so you can get really sturdy plants with really nice deep rooting root systems. And what I've done here, because I'm using this is the base of the container, so it's just the bottom of the container, I'm just cutting these off, and that's just the top of the container there, so it's the whole container. But what I'm thinking of doing as well is where I started some of these worm beds at the start of lockdown, they were that 400 millimeters deep, and since then the depth's actually increased, because I've lifted some of the beds. So what I'm kind of thinking is make them sort of two-tier with these smaller containers, and then that just gives you a little bit extra volume, so that would be about 500 millimeters deep. But when it's time to harvest, you can just take them out, and it's not going to be desperately heavy. One of the issues with these is once they're surrounded by compost, they do get quite heavy, and they get quite well fixed into the ground, because the worm activity will distribute that material equally on the outside and the inside as well, so that'd be quite hard to pull out. There's a little wood pigeon walking on the canopy. Yeah, so thanks for watching. I hope you got some ideas from this, or get some enthusiasm to start recycling materials and using reclaimed materials, and finding what's local and what's free near to you. So thanks a lot. Speak to you soon.